Hello, welcome to the Build Vibrant Health podcast. My name is Mary, and we have Glenn Schmeisel here today. Glenn operates Mold Canine, and they perform mold dog inspections. They've been in business for about 2 years, helping people detect and find mold in their homes for better health. So welcome, Glenn. Excited to have you here today.
Thanks. I appreciate the invite.
Of course. So tell us a little bit about how you got started in this mold dog inspection arena.
Sure. So the way we got started is the way a lot of our clients kind of got started. We had mold in our home. We tried to remediate. We couldn't find it all. My wife is super sensitive, so she's sick and she knows that when she's around it because she's so sensitive, right? So she's like, I know we still have it. And I'm pulling out my hair looking for the mold boogeyman around every corner and under every bed and in every closet, and it's just crazy. And then so we found out that there's such a thing called a mold detection dog.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, pioneered by this guy named Bill. He lives down in Florida. He's a great guy. And he was coming up to Michigan with his mold dog Sarge to check a bunch of homes for mold. And we were like, please put us on your schedule, right? And so Sarge, his dog, was able to point out specifically everywhere in our house where we still had mold, places we didn't even think about looking for, like windows and, we had a random cardboard box that had mold in it that we didn't even know, things like that. And I can't express how much of a relief it was for me and my wife to finally have, a target, of where we need to finish remediating, and so, Bill was able to meet Molly, our dog, and he thought she could do the work. So we decided to have her trained, and that's kind of how we got our start.
Beautiful. And so in finding more mold in your house through this mold dog investigation, I'm sure that was a relief for you to actually have answers and know that you're not crazy and that there is actually an issue in the house. But it can be a little bit maddening when you're doing air samples and you're doing dust samples and you're doing other sorts of testing and it's just not showing up. Did you go through that whole course and different types of testing before you stumbled upon the mold dog thing?
Yeah. So, we, when we were in this, we really only knew about air tests and, swab samples where you take a sample specifically off like a spot on your wall or wherever you think there's mold. And so we had hired several people, different companies, to come through and do more air tests because we're like, I know that there's something. And they look around too, they'll check around, they'll do a visual inspection. But they were all saying, oh no, you're good, that you should be fine, which is maddening. It's frustrating and maddening because we know that we're not fine. We're sick, we're still sick, and we know that there's still mold. So there's something unique about the dog going through your whole house and checking every single wall and every single cabinet that just no other mold test that I've found can really do that. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I saw your Instagram story the other day of Molly actually going through room by room. Do you want to explain the process of what that looks like when you're going into a house? How does she determine? Does she bark? How does she alert that there's mold in a certain area?
Sure. Yeah. So the way we work it out is I usually go in first to the house and I do a couple things. I talk with the homeowner about the history of the home, how old it is, if there's any areas that they've already had remediated, or if they know that, like, their toilet overflowed or any sort of water damage events or something, so that I can kind of get a history. I'll look around, see what I can see without Molly. I'll check and make sure that there's no mouse traps she's gonna stick her paw into, or nothing dangerous. No vases that she's gonna destroy when she's checking around. And then I'll take her through the house, and we'll go room by room. She'll smell every 2 feet of a wall or the couch or the cabinet or really whatever's in front of us. We'll just check everything. And if she smells mold, she'll lay down,
Mm.
and then I'll ask her to show me, and she'll point with her nose more specifically where it is. So if we're going around a bed and she lays down, if it's in the mattress, she'll point up to the mattress.
Mm.
If it's in the floor, she'll point down to the floor. So that gives us an idea of specifically where is the mold, and we've been able to, narrow things down for our clients, very
Mhm.
specifically where the remediation needs to happen.
Got it. And what kind of molds is she able to detect for?
That's a great question. I get that question all the time. So she's trained for all harmful or toxic families of mold, so, Stachybotrys, Penicillium, Aspergillus, all the bad ones, right? So she can detect them all. She just can't tell me which one's which when we're in a house. If she smells it, she'll alert and we know it's there.
Okay. And so this goes in my next question of the training. What kind of training does a mold dog like Molly receive to be able to detect that?
Right. Yeah. So the way we had her trained is Bill, the guy I mentioned before. He's the expert dog trainer. He's been training dogs to do all sorts of things for 26 years. He pioneered the mold dog industry, so he knows. He has his proprietary training method that is successful. So we sent Molly down to Florida to train with him for 3 months. He trains her how to do that, and then I went down. I trained for about a week about how to take her through a house and how to keep her trained. So
Mhm.
what I do with her every day is we have actual samples, little Tupperware samples or little baggies of mold, of toxic mold that's growing on household items. I like to
Mm.
use things like little pieces of drywall or pieces of wood or couch cushion, that's
Mhm.
actually things you might find in a house, right?
Mhm.
And so we'll train her by, hiding it somewhere, or like we'll go to, a hardware store or something. I'll hide a little baggie on the shelf, and then I'll take her down the hallway of the aisleway of the thing. And if she passes it up, we make her do it again until she gets it right, but
Mhm.
we train every day, and so she's usually very accurate. She doesn't really miss it. So that's kind of the how she was trained and how we keep her trained.
Gotcha. And it's similar to how a dog would test for drugs at the airport or wherever. That's that
Mhm.
kind of level of detection, correct?
Yeah, same way that like a police dog will be trained to find drugs or
Mhm.
bombs or things like that. It's the same kind of level of training. It's admissible in court even.
Mhm.
If we needed if I needed to be a witness as a mold dog handler in a court case, then I could do that. It's very accurate. It's a very reliable test.
Which is really cool because there's certain mold tests like the ERMI, if you don't know what that stands for, Environmental Readiness Mold Index score, that is not necessarily admissible in court. So that's cool that you can actually use that, and a dog isn't isn't gonna lie. They can't really
Right.
make stuff up. For me, it seems like it would be pretty truthful of a test.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that people ask every once in a while is like, you know, is she just laying down for treats, And that's why we train,
Mm-hmm.
because if she doesn't find the mold, she doesn't get rewarded. And she
Mm-hmm.
has it in her mind that I know where all the mold is every time, because when we train, I always know where it is.
Mm-hmm.
So when we go through a house, she doesn't know that I don't know that
That
it's
you don't
there,
know it. Got it.
so she, but yeah.
So when you're in a house, you are, say this bathroom wall has a mold issue. What are next steps for the homeowner? Are you providing any sort of like report or any sort of documentation so that moving forward they can then address that in their house?
Yeah. Okay. So here's what we do. So any spot that she alerts, I'll mark with a little piece of painter's tape just like a reminder of this is where her nose pointed. And so this is
Mm-hmm.
where the mold is, right?
Got it.
And then I'll put her back in the car. And then instead of writing up a report, I typically just do a really nice long, walkthrough of the house with the client.
Mhm.
And so we'll go to that bathroom wall and we'll go to that spot and I'll say, okay, here's how Molly was reacting. She pointed to the shower. Based on what is here, it's likely that there's something going on, behind the wall where the pipes are, because she pointed to the wall, not the floor. That's
Mhm.
what's there. There's probably moisture. And then I try to give them some next steps of what to do, and I'm not a remediation company. I just
Mhm.
do the test, but I do know a little bit about remediation. And so, and the steps for mold. And so if there's mold on drywall, you got to remove the drywall. If there's mold, on studs, maybe you can, sand it down or scrub
Mhm.
it off or something like that. And so we just kind of talk through that whole process. And then I always allow that, I say, hey, if you have any other questions or anything, you can always call me, after the fact. We can talk through it again. And that's what I like to do. And hopefully that gives the client the ability to, understand what's going on in their home and have, more knowledge to get rid of the problem and get rid of it effectively. Right.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Um, my next question for you was, how long does an inspection like that take in a house? And are you doing inside and outside of the home?
That's great
Oh,
question.
those
So
are two questions.
right. So I'll do a visual inspection around the house. So usually I'll just kind of walk around the outside of the house and just see what I can see. But Molly really does her best work in the house, and that's what you want to know, right? You want to know, where's the mold in the inside of my house, in the inside of the environment, right? Um, and the total process, from the point when I pull up in your driveway and to the point where I'm leaving and we've already had our talk, it's about 2 hours, depending on the size of the house and how much Molly finds.
Mhm.
Sometimes the appointment goes 3 hours, and really the appointment takes as long as it takes until we find everything, and you feel confident that we've covered everything and you've asked all your questions. So but typically it's around 2 hours is start to finish.
Gotcha. Well, and that seems like a reasonable amount of time, depending on the size of the house. I know there's some inspectors that will do a 5-minute air sample and they're in and out in
Mhm.
like 20, 30 minutes. And that's a red flag to me. You're not going to get much
Right.
information from an air sample in the first place, but also just spending that little amount of time in a house. So it sounds like it's
Right.
pretty comprehensive what she covers.
hmm Yeah, and also those same inspectors will, tell you that you're crazy for thinking that there's mold in your bedroom, when all they spent 5 minutes in your bedroom, but
Hmm.
you live there, and
Right.
you're, I tell my clients, trust your gut. Your brain is a very powerful computer. You're taking in information all the time. If you have a icky feeling about a certain wall, you know, Molly will probably find mold there, or maybe there's some bacteria or something that's going on there that's affecting you, and your brain's trying to tell you.
Right.
Um,
Well,
you
that
know,
was
I
me. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, no, that's okay.
My other, I guess, question from what you just said is, so there's mold, but often in water damaged buildings, there's also bacteria, there's also mycotoxins, there's other toxins that make a water damaged building really dangerous and detrimental to people's health, especially if you're susceptible to that genetically. So is Molly able to pick up on other things besides mold that's in a building?
So she's trained to find mold, and that's what we train with, and stuff like that. Now, that being said, um, mold produces mycotoxins because of the things that it's in contact with, right?
Hmm.
And that's another reason why I train her with mold growing on building materials, because
Hmm.
that mold that I'm growing in my piece of Tupperware that she trains with,
Hmm.
um, is going to be producing the similar mycotoxins that the mold that's going to be growing on the drywall in your bathroom, right?
Right.
And so the mycotoxins are part of the smell, and I think that she will be able to pick up on that when we're in a house. But there's no way for her to tell me, this spot over here is just mycotoxins, but this
Mm-hmm.
spot over here is mold.
It's a
She's
mold
just
issue.
picking up the scent.
Right.
So.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense. And then in terms of
Mhm.
her own body, is there anything that you do preventatively to make sure that her health is protected? I know, I think it's wonderful that she can detect what's going on in a home,
Mhm.
but being sensitive myself to mold, I have to ask, how's her health, and is there anything that you do to help her detox as she's going into these homes?
Yeah, so I get that question a lot, and so I'm glad you asked. So we do a few things to protect her health wise, and like I mentioned briefly before about the mouse traps and stuff. If I go into a home and it's really moldy and it's so bad that I feel like I shouldn't be in here without a respirator, then I can't safely bring Molly in there because she can't wear a respirator. Um, so I check out the buildings that I go into before I bring her in for her safety. She's also not in there very long. She lives in a clean apartment now. So
Right.
she spends 95% of her life in a clean, mold-free environment. And then she spends about 45 minutes to an hour, checking homes out with me.
Mm-hmm.
And then what Bill explained to me about dogs is that when they sniff, when they check for things, they kind of pass the scent over their olfactory senses in their nose, and if it's harmful, they can snort it out and take a fresh breath.
Mm-hmm.
So that's I guess that's why dogs can check for things like drugs and stuff, and they're not getting drugs in their system, when they're sniffing around looking for things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same kind of a thing. Like if it's harmful, they know to avoid that area. So
Yeah, that makes sense. I
now
do.
we don't do anything to like, we don't give her anything to detox her, but I'm thinking about those lines. I've heard that there's some things that you can give your pets to detox.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be interested in doing that, as this goes on. We've been doing it for 2 years, and she seems to be fine, but I don't want to harm her, or I want to make sure that
Sure.
she stays healthy. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one powerful thing for our own bodies as humans is food as medicine, right? And so one thing could be making sure her food is her diet is really dialed in. I can share
Right.
resources after the podcast too, but
Sure, sure.
I really got into dog nutrition and food with my dog Andromeda last year. And I was feeding her what's called epigenous dogs as well, and it helps detox from glyphosate, which their paws are so close to the ground. So they're
Yeah.
absorbing a lot of like herbicides and things when they're in parks and walking around, something that we as humans don't necessarily
Okay.
need to think about because they're not crawling on the earth. But
Right.
yeah, there's definitely things out there for dogs um, that I'm happy to share. So what geographical areas do you cover with inspections? You're based in Michigan, but do you go elsewhere?
Yeah. So we travel kind of regularly to the surrounding states, like, Illinois, Ohio, Indiana, Wisconsin. Those things are not too far for us to go on a weekend or something like that. And we've also done further away trips. We've done trips to California, Washington State. Um, so we've done some further things. Bill, he's down in Florida, and he travels kind of up to the Georgia area and stuff. So I don't really get a lot of, we just don't get a lot of clients who ask for us because they already know about Bill, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a mold dog in New York now too that Bill trained, and then there's one in California. So, and I think there's one in Texas. So they're kind of, Molly was kind of like the first one that Bill has
Mm-hmm.
trained in years. But there's other ones around. So, if you're too far away from me for me to book a trip in the near future, I'll pass along somebody else's number, and hopefully you guys can get connected.
Sure. Do you know if there's one in Arizona? I think there
Um,
used to
I
be.
don't, not that I know of, but Texas is not too far away, right? So maybe maybe they wouldn't mind traveling to Arizona.
Yeah, I would imagine if you got enough houses and enough people interested in a certain area that you kind of do some groupings together.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in the homes that you go into, what percentage of homes come back with a clean bill of health, according to Molly?
Yeah. So hardly any homes that we go through, Molly doesn't find any mold. Um, but that's a little bit of a skewed number because um, most of our clients are sick from mold and they've already
Mhm,
done some sort of testing. They're kind of in the place where we were, when we found out about mold dogs. They know
mhm,
they have mold in their house, or they've done a test in their body. They've done like the urine test or something, and they know they have mycotoxins and stuff. So it's just a matter of now Molly and I got to find it.
right.
A lot of my clients do ERMI tests or hurts me tests, and they it comes back with a high number, and that's great. It's great that they know that there's mold in the house, but they still don't know where in the house it is. They
Mhm,
don't know if they need to throw out all their furniture and tear out every wall. Like the list goes on. It can be a little insurmountable, but that's
mhm,
where most of our clients come to us is before you know, they've already done some testing and they know it's there. So, but we
right.
have tested a few houses that have been pretty clean. We just came from a house last week that was built in 2022.
Mhm,
There was mold in the duct system,
mhm.
but we couldn't really find it anywhere else. So,
Well, that's good.
there's yeah. So fingers crossed, that client can remediate pretty simply, and have a clean house.
Mhm.
So they're out there, it's just we haven't come across very many.
Right. Well, so if ductwork is, I guess it depends on the design of the house. But if you're in, say, like an office building or a place where the ductwork is a little bit higher up, how is Molly testing for something like that? Is that ever an issue if it?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So there's a couple ways we go around that. So a lot of times when ductwork is going through the main floor, it's a few inches away from her nose, so
Mhm,
she'll alert to it, and as she goes by the floor vent, she'll, if there's mold in the vents coming out of the vent, she'll alert to it. But then again, if we're like in the basement, all the vents are above us, right?
mhm,
you know but mold is heavy and it'll settle on the ground. So if there's mold coming out of the vent, and this has happened a lot of times before, we'll be in a basement, everything's looking pretty clean except for right underneath the vent, right above us. Then she starts alerting. And that's
mhm,
because there's mold in the vent, it's blowing down on the ground, and there's mold spores kind of collecting under that spot, right?
mm,
Same thing with like attics. I can go up into an attic and look around, but Molly can't walk around up in an attic.
right.
But if there's mold in the attic, it's probably going to be coming through your house, and she'll be alerting on the top level, or on the ground. She'll be alerting underneath, where it's moldy, where you have a roof leak or whatever, wherever the problem is.
Right. Well, your house has a breath, and just because there's mold in one room of your house doesn't mean you can't find it in other places because of that. It might be more
Mhm.
concentrated in one area, but um, especially if it's in the HVAC system, it's not just isolated in one area. It's really in your entire house. Hey, Molly. So
She's
sweet.
sleepy. I'm trying to get
Hi.
her to say
It's
hello.
like, what
Come
is
here.
this?
Come here. Say hi,
Aw.
Molly.
What kind of dog is she?
She's a mix. We rescued her from a shelter,
Hmm.
and now she's licking me.
Aw,
You
she's
goof.
a little starlight shy.
Yeah. Oh, there she is. Okay, so yeah, so she's a mix. We rescued her, but we did do a DNA test.
Hmm.
So she's got beagle, husky, pug, and pit bull.
Mm.
So You can kind of see it if she'll hold still. You can kind
You
of
can
see
see the pug tail, the little
yeah,
ringlet. Yeah.
exactly.
It's
Yeah,
so cute.
the pug tail. She looks like a beagle from her face and her size too. She's kind of like a the size of a beagle, you know.
Hmm.
Um, so she's like 35 pounds. I don't know. So,
And she's about
but
2 years
she's
old, you said? Or you had her for 2 years?
so she's probably nearing 4. We got
Okay.
her when she was about a year and a half. But they didn't really have a great birth date for her because she I guess she came from a shelter in Ohio to a shelter in Michigan where we
Mm,
adopted her. So some of that got kind of lost in translation.
gotcha. Mhm. Well, thank you so much for showing us, and I'm glad she got to say hello for a brief second there. Um,
Yeah.
I was I was thinking, oh, there's a lot of police dogs that are German Shepherds, and that's kind of like the certain, breed. So in terms of mold testing, there's not really a breed per se that's used.
Right. Uh, what Bill explained to me about breeds, because we asked about that too when we asked about having her trained. And what he said is that all dogs have the nose for it. It's
Hmm.
just a matter of whether or not they're have the I guess personality or intelligence to do the work.
Hmm.
So and Molly's I guess a perfect candidate for that because she really loves to do the work and she's smart enough to do it. So she's really great at it. So whatever her mutt combination, it produced a good mold dog. Um, so yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. Um, for I think those are all the questions I have for you. Is there any last piece of advice or anything that you think would be important for listeners to hear in terms of mold
Yeah,
inspection?
I guess one thing that I would say is that um, if you're worried about mold, one of the things that we do is that we'll look for anything that looks like it's gotten wet, right? So if you can look at your main floor and from your basement or your crawl space or something, and you can see wood that looks like it has gotten wet in the past, it doesn't take much for mold to grow. That might give you an indication or a clue that mold might be there in that spot. So if like there's not a mold dog nearby or you can't schedule it, you might just I mean, you can get pretty far with just a flashlight and your eyes.
Hmm.
I mean, Molly's definitely my ace in the hole here, but because she'll tell me for sure where things are, and there's been things that I've discovered that I would never have seen if I didn't know firsthand that there was mold there. But that's some good piece of advice for people who are struggling and looking for
Sure.
the mold. And if you look around and just see any wood that looks like it's gotten wet in the past, it has that kind of look like it's got a water stain on it.
Sure.
That's a good indication that there could be mold in that spot.
Yeah, it's a really good point. There's always telltale signs, whether it be water damage or like peeling of paint, a little bit of bubbling, that musty
Mhm.
smell. And sometimes there's not any sign. The house that I was living in,
Right.
uh, there was a little suspect area in the basement, but it was a newly renovated house and everything was completely painted over and you couldn't really tell where the issue was. So in that case, something like Molly would have been really helpful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
I do have
another
one more
thing.
question.
Oh, okay, go
So
for it.
say Molly finds 5 or 6 different major sources in the home. Is there a level of priority, or like that can be determined when she comes into the house, or would that need further testing?
You mean like what to take care of
What to
first? You
take care
mean?
of first, because they can be overwhelming. So you have 6, maybe 10, maybe you can shed some light on like how many sources she typically finds. But if I have a dog walking through my house, laying down and barking at all these different sources, it might feel a little bit overwhelming to the homeowner of like, okay, now where do I focus and how much money is this going to cost? And where do I focus my energy and effort?
Right. And yeah, and that's part of what the post inspection walk through the house is. That's part of the whole process. Is I try to give you guys, the clients, a a to-do list, of what to take care of first, so I try to categorize things into what's a mold source and what is a symptom of the mold being in your house, and what's easy to tackle now financially or just physically, and what might take a while, and I also try to look at it as, what's going to help your health in the best way. Like, what's that first domino that's going to help you the most, and a lot of times people's HVAC systems are kind of infected with mold. And that can be a relatively inexpensive, big improvement if you get those cleaned and sanitized right away, even though you're probably going to have to do it again after you remediate. It might, depending on what Molly finds, if she's alerting to every single vent in the house, then there's a big problem in your HVAC system. And so you might want to get it cleaned right away. And that might help out a lot, and it depends on the mold source too that she finds, because she'll smell mold that's dried out and dead, or mold that's, still getting wet and active, right? So she can find both. And when we explore in those spots, if there's an active mold source that's getting wet, that fixing that moisture problem is probably going to go to the top of the list, because you want to keep that from happening, so it just depends on what she finds and where it is and how easy it is. It's a very complex question to answer. And so it's, and as far as typically what she finds, I think that the average house that we go into, she'll find 2 to 3 mold sources, and then a lot of other spots that are symptoms of the mold source, right? Like your carpet is filthy with mold because you have these mold sources in your house for a while, your HVAC system, I wouldn't say that every vent that she alerts to is a mold source necessarily. It's just kind of a symptom of the big problem.
System. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And you mentioned something like carpet, or maybe she's testing a couch or a chair. And that's why it's really important when we're looking at mold inspection and then remediation to take into account the belongings and other things that are in the home as part of a bigger remediation process. So thanks for taking time to explain it.
Yeah, and that can be really helpful too with Molly, is like, if she identifies a dresser that's moldy, now you just get rid of the dresser, or, there's been times where people's like sump pump is covered by a piece of wood and it's super moldy and filthy. Just, before we leave, we'll just take it get a big trash bag and just throw that sucker out. Sometimes it's a quick fix, and but a lot of times it's, it takes a professional's hand, but at least
Right. Yeah, it's about peeling back layers and prioritizing and figuring out what are the big smoking guns in the room, and then going from there.
Right.
Awesome.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time today to share your expertise in this area. I learned a lot. If someone wants to reach out to you and learn a little bit more, maybe work with you, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah. So we're on Facebook and Instagram as Mold Canine, and that's spelled out, MOLDCANINE. Our website is moldcanine.com. You can go on the website and fill out a contact form, and it sends me an email. And that's really helpful, because then I'll know, kind of where you're at, if you're in Michigan, if you're in Illinois, whatnot, what's your phone number? And then I can kind of reach out to you. And maybe even if I get a lot of people in a similar area, then maybe we can plan a trip out of state, So the website's a great place to do it. You can also just call or text me at 248-294-0560. It goes right to my cell phone. So you can call me, you can text me, you can leave me a voicemail. You can send us an email at info@moldcanine. That's cool. I think those are the main ones.
So multiple channels, and I'll include all that in the show notes too, so people have tangibles that they can click on and reach out to you. Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. If you guys enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, share with a friend that this information could benefit. Have a beautiful day.
Awesome. Thanks again.